The creative life can be mysterious. There are weeks when nothing goes right. Distractions are unavoidable. Unexpected detours throw me off course. Nothing quite works out the way it was planned, and even worse, sometimes things just fall apart. And then there are weeks when things seem to come together in ways that were unanticipated, but in a good way. Things are humming along at a steady pace, and I get to the end of the week and think, wow, that was pretty good. Good weeks, bad weeks, the ups and downs are to be expected. After 20 years of maintaining a creative life to one degree or another, I'm kind of accustomed to it. But there is another kind of week that happens from time to time, and I still have difficulty dealing with it. Those are the weeks where, from the outside, everything looks great. But inside, despite everything going right, I find myself facing a crisis of faith in my creative vision. I'll talk about that and give you an update on my progress in this week's episode of The Million Words Project. Welcome to The Million Words Project. I'm Eric Sheridan White. I've challenged myself to write 1 million new words in 12 months, and each week I post an update on my progress. In each episode, I also share the ups and downs of my own creative life. Hopefully, you'll find something here to encourage you in your creative endeavors. I've spent more than a dozen years helping writers, would-be writers, and other creatives pursue the big thing project they've always wanted to accomplish. One of the most important lessons I've learned as a teacher, creativity coach, and mentor is that when I share the things I've learned and continue to learn, it reinforces those lessons in my own writing life. And this week, I really needed to be reminded of some very important lessons. But before we get to that, let's take a look at this week's progress. Week 13 was the single biggest week so far. My weekly target for reaching 1 million words in 12 months is 20,000 words a week. As you can see, this week's total was 25,563. Taking a look at the category breakdown, this was an unusual week. Journaling was down a little bit after last week's high count, but this marks the 6th week in a row over 5,000 words in that category. If you missed it, I've spent the last 3 episodes talking about the importance of journaling in my creative and personal life. So check those out if you haven't already watched them. And you can watch them again if you really want to, I don't mind. Nonfiction and fiction word counts were okay. Lower than ideal, but the category in between them there, you can see why. I finally got the go-ahead to write the client project I've been waiting 6 weeks to start. I knocked out a little more than 9,000 words in that category. I have another little bit to do next week and then finish that project up. Lastly, this was the lowest week for the word count in the life document category. The lowest count since I started the Million Words Project. I'm still working to rebalance some of my creative energy, and we can see the cumulative distribution chart shows that the life document is now well below the 50% mark, and the wedges for the word pie are continuing to get a little bit more evenly distributed, which is what I'm hoping for. I continue to be well ahead of pace. By week 13, the minimum pace is 260,000 words, and my current total is right at 280,000 words. Last but not least, you can see the 10-week rolling total compared to the baseline pace. Across the board, the data shows that things are rolling along. Everything looks good. So why did this week feel so unsuccessful? And that's this week's topic. Even though this week was a rip-roaring success in many ways, I experienced a crisis of faith in relation to my creative work. The week was pretty well balanced. The client work is time sensitive, so it was pushed to the top of the to-do list. But overall, I accomplished my writing goals. I got necessary things done in my personal life, and I had time to work on several other ongoing projects that aren't part of my weekly word count targets. I had several big ideas that were either enhanced or clarified this week. There were a number of aha moments and some encouraging progress, but the nagging feeling of discontent started to rear its head. Early in the week, I wrote the following in my journal. The whole thing feels like a giant jigsaw puzzle with no edges or corners and an indeterminate number of pieces, and no reference photo of what the final product should look like. I keep finding new pieces that fit the puzzle and reveal some additional exciting aspect of the big picture, but it just keeps getting bigger. A giant jigsaw puzzle with unlimited pieces and no edges or corners, that's a pretty good metaphor for my creative life these days. And while my journal entry refers to no reference photo to work from, I think a better analogy would be that the reference photo of what the end result should look like is always kind of blurry, even on the best days, and sometimes it seems to change altogether. Like I thought I was putting together a 500-piece puzzle of puppy dogs, and it turned out to be a 1,000-piece puzzle of butterflies. Now, on my upbeat, optimistic days, I have an unshakable faith that whatever final picture is revealed in the puzzle I'm putting together, everything will work out in the long run. My job right now, in this moment, is to find the pieces that fit together and continue to complete the puzzle one piece at a time. Little by little, day by day, with each little victory, more of the picture is revealed. I often say in these videos that the motto of the Million Words Project Challenge is small steps lead to big results. And most days, I believe that. Most days I pursue the next step with enthusiasm and joy. But at the same time, I am often pursued by doubts. Most of my doubts are fleeting. If I have a bad writing session, and recently I abandoned a fiction writing session after an hour and a half in which I had only written 500 words, less than 500 words, well, those days can make me question my ability and my artistic vision. But usually those brief battles with doubt dissipate with the next day's journaling session or the next time I sit down and knock off 2,000 words in a little over an hour. I overcome the setback and my creative faith is restored. But this week was different. When answers to creative questions I'd been struggling with suddenly revealed themselves, my enthusiasm actually waned. The more inspiration I found, the less energy I had. Things I've been working on for months grew in complexity, and new layers of theme and meaning found their way into my work. And I had an idea for yet another book, and it began to break me a little. Later in the week, I wrote this in my journal: how will I ever accomplish all of this? Usually I look at all these ideas and possible books and I'm excited, but there are days though where I don't feel it, and I want to avoid the question of how, as well as the answer. This is where faith and doubt often live together for me. On the one hand, I find great energy and a sense of purpose and meaning in pursuing my creative vision. On the other, if I stare too long at the mountain of ideas that I want to pursue and the books I want to write and the projects I want to take on, I doubt they could all be accomplished by me in 2 lifetimes, let alone the half lifetime or so I hope to still have remaining. But I also know that this fixation on not having time to get things done is kind of a deflection. The rational part of me knows that if I have 20 books I want to write, I will be more satisfied on my proverbial deathbed if I've only written 6 of those, rather than if I never wrote any of them. Something is better than nothing, and I've been on a pace to do a lot more than just a little something. I address this in the next line of my journal. Things are going pretty well. Is that the problem? A bit of self-sabotage? Am I subconsciously limiting myself? And if so, why? In this moment, I was wrestling with the competing realities I was feeling. I was hitting my targets, and yet I had a nagging feeling that things were not right. Something subtle was out of alignment. It's like I was at base camp on Mount Everest, and I was fixated on the difficulty of the final summit rather than on the next step and the next step and the one after. That preoccupation with the seemingly unachievable task before me manifested last week in a lethargic attitude. I got a lot done. I checked off all the boxes of a successful week, but I also spent a lot of time doing nothing. scrolling Instagram and looking at my phone, sitting around, wallowing in a lack of motivation, dozing off while watching some video or another. I know that doing this work is so much more satisfying than not doing it. And yet, I sometimes still get suckered into allowing myself to be distracted or lazy. I could have done more, and that was one level of disappointment in myself. But a more consequential problem was this. In the throes of my lethargy, I began to campaign to convince myself that it really didn't matter if I did any of the things I dream of doing. Stagnation led to existential doubt. My journal continued. Do I fear increased efficiency in actually getting things done, or am I just lazy and want to say, you don't have to do all of that because none of it actually matters anyway? I don't feel better physically for having a lazy day. I don't think I was mentally drained before I spent a good part of the day half sleeping and staring at my phone and looking for something to do, even though I have next steps clearly laid out. By the end of the week, though, in a moment of synchronicity or fate or the hand of God turning my head to notice something that had been there for 2.5 years, I opened a book called Getting Things Done. I won't get into all of the details, but the key takeaway was that I was reminded that I needed to be focused on next steps. Having long-term, big-picture plans is great, but most of my time needs to be focused on what needs to happen next. If too much of my time is spent focused on the mountain of work ahead of me and on new items I continue to add to that list, then I can become overwhelmed and my body and mind will rebel. I closed out last week with a renewed perspective and a plan, which I'll tell you a little bit more about next week. There's an old Chinese proverb which you've probably heard or read at some point. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. This is, of course, what I mean when I say small steps lead to big results. And the reason I repeat that so often in these videos is I need to be reminded of it on a regular basis. Part of the reason I need to be reminded so often is that my personality tends toward dreaming and planning and has trouble with the doing sometimes. I have a perfectionist streak that wants to know every answer to every possible question and have a contingency for any possible problem or issue that might conceivably arise before I start the journey. But life doesn't work that way. I have to remind myself that the key to getting done is to get started. And sometimes you have to start the trip before you know where it is you're going or the exact path you'll take to get there. The obvious takeaway this week is simple. If you find yourself overwhelmed by the size and scope of a project that you know deep down you want to tackle, it is wise to take a step back and focus on short-term, achievable steps toward your desired goal. A secondary takeaway is this. Often, when I find myself in the middle of what I call the creative crisis of faith, it can be easy to want to just give up and let the lack of motivation and laziness conquer me. What is more valuable to me, to those around me, and I would argue to the world at large, is to see that fear and dread and bubbling hopelessness as an opportunity to take stock of where I am, where I'm going, and how I'm going to get there. These feelings of being down and not knowing why were the catalyst for me to dig a little deeper and to uncover some truths that had been buried for a while. And once I did that, I was able to correct my course and reinvigorate my creative life. As you finish this video and head back into your own pursuits, I'd like you to ponder your own balance between big picture thinking and a more narrow focus on the next steps you need to take. If you've had a similar crisis of creative faith, did you find it valuable or debilitating? Did you find your way through it? Did you find any new and interesting tools to utilize in your daily life? If so, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment with this video, or there are plenty of ways to connect with me listed in the show notes. Week 13 is all wrapped up. Thank you for joining me. If you made it this far, why not hit the like button or leave a comment? It would be encouraging to know others are out there. A big thank you to my childhood friend Sarah, who utilized the Buy Me a Coffee link to let me know she was watching and appreciates seeing my videos. Thank you, Sarah. As always, check out the show notes for additional information and send a link to this video series if there's someone in your life you think might be interested. Remember, your words matter. Make them count.